All right, so I was going to make this video yesterday, ended up getting a little bit distracted, so we're going to talk about it today, but this was just some polling data that recently came out, a little bit late to the party on this, but it was just so egregious that I didn't think that I could skip over this in terms of content. So, obviously we have the GOP first primary debate that's going to be happening tomorrow. I'll obviously be covering all of the shit that happens with that. Trump decided he's not going to show up for the debates because he's a cowardly little bitch boy, but it is what it is. He's going to do his own segment with Tucker Carlson that's going to be airing as a counter programming at the same exact time of that. So it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of that. But in the meantime, we do have some polling data like this that is basically giving us an insight in terms of why Donald Trump has such a firm iron grip on the Republican base and why it looks like many of these other people who are going to be up on the debate stage, whether it's Vivek Ramaswamy or Ron DeSantis or Mike Pence or Nikki Haley or Tim Scott or even Chris Christie, that none of these people are really going to have a legitimate shot at defeating Donald Trump, assuming that he doesn't die or end up in prison before the election takes place, although I think he could probably still win from a jail cell. But here from Axios, they say Trump voters trust him more than their families and religious leaders. Okay, so let's get into some of the details here. They say Trump voters are more likely to believe the former president is telling them the truth than their friends and family or religious leaders, according to a new CBS/YouGov poll. So they said the poll finds that Trump continues to dominate the race for the 2024 nomination, with 62% of likely GOP primary voters supporting him, while only 16% saying that they would vote for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. I mean, as he pointed out the other day, Trump in that Truth Social, he is crashing like an ailing bird. I think that's the phrase that he came up with, right? Crashing like an ailing bird, down to 16% at this point. I mean, there were points where DeSantis was looking like he was up in the low 30s or mid 30s at some point, and that he maybe could have closed the gap, but now it's just not even remotely close, right? But they say the poll sheds light on why Trump's support within the GOP base is so hard for other candidates to shake, and it is essentially because they're in a cult. I mean, I don't think there's any other reasonable way that you can interpret this data. So they say among those who are least considering voting for Trump, 95% believe that he is, or who are at least considering voting for Trump, 95% believe that he fights for people like me, while 99% believe that things were better under Trump. Okay, I got some breaking news here for the 95% who believe that he fights for people like me. Unless you happen to be a millionaire or a billionaire in this country, he is not fighting for you, point blank period. Okay, obviously I have my many issues with Democrats and their corporatist tendencies and their corruption and all of that, but Donald Trump is a billionaire, right? I mean, he is massively corrupt. He is a sellout, and his biggest accomplishment while he was in office was giving a tax cut to the richest people and corporations in the entire country. That's what he did. He didn't support unions. He didn't expand access to healthcare. He didn't raise wages. He didn't do anything that materially uplifts the vast majority of the American people. So 95%, though, still believe that he is fighting for people like me, right? They say among those who plan to vote for Trump, 71% feel that what he tells them is true. 71% feels that what he tells them is true, higher than the results for friends and family, which is at 63%. Conservative media figures, 56%. Okay, granted, that's 100% true. You shouldn't trust what, outlets like Newsmax or One American News Network or Fox News are telling you. So 56%. But, I don't think that that's people who are saying, okay, I'm going to be more reasonable than Fox News, right? They're saying I'm going to be more further into the Trump cult or into the Trump base than Fox News would be. So they are to the right of a lot of these conservative news outlets, but 56% trust conservative media figures, and religious leaders are down at 42%, okay, which is also interesting, right? They say the percentage of those who consider Trump a source of truth drops to 53% among all likely GOP primary voters, and a sign that some remain skeptical of his claims. Okay, so it's 53% among the entire Republican base, but it's up there at 71% for people who think, or for people who think they're going to end up voting for Trump, right? They say, however, that's still higher than 44% who trust religious leaders and 32% who trust medical scientists, and far higher than the 10% who trust Biden. Okay, so 10% trust Biden out of these, I guess, generic Republican voters, right? 32% who trust medical scientists. I mean, I guess that shouldn't be too surprising given the COVID era and how much, focus was put on that by right-wingers during this COVID era about how all of the science is lying to you, and some people going so far as to say, like, maybe, the vaccines have, like, microchips inside of them that are going to work their way up into your brain and control you or track you in some way or another. So I guess that's not that surprising, but I mean, it is, again, a pretty alarming gap, considering that we're talking about Donald Trump, who was probably, like, the most successful con man in American history. I mean, the guy lies more than basically anybody else in, the political world that I have seen, which is saying a lot because most politicians are liars, right? I think Biden is a liar to a large extent. I think most presidents have been liars, especially throughout modern American history, but Donald Trump somehow manages to surpass them all. I mean, this guy... Still, I just saw a story the other day that even as he is facing all of these indictments for trying to do a coup and overturning the 2020 election, he is still going to try to make the argument in court that he won the 2020 election. He's still trying to prove that there was enough voter fraud in order to make him the legitimate president. I mean, that's part of what his defense seemingly is going to be as he's heading towards these, Georgia and DC cases. So that's the guy that we're talking about. I mean, again, the guy who ran on, I'm going to protect your jobs here, and then we had outsourcing under his administration, right? The guy who said, I'm going to drain the swamp. That was his biggest thing, right? Drain the swamp and build the wall. Well, he didn't build the wall. They, along with Steve Bannon, managed to fleece Republican voters and scammed them out of millions and millions of dollars, and they didn't even end up building a border wall because it wasn't even something they were legally able to do or capable of doing anyways. But, on top of that, again, like, drain the swamp, and then he puts people like Steve Mnuchin, a former, executive at Goldman Sachs who helped tank the economy a decade ago, and puts him in charge of the Treasury, right? Puts somebody as corrupt as Betsy DeVos in charge of the, education department. I mean, so many different examples of what we could point to in terms of him not draining the swamp, but not only not draining the swamp, but becoming the swampiest swamp creature in American history, and somehow still these people trust him, right? But they finish off here, they say, according to the CBS poll, 77% of likely Republican voters believe the charges against Trump for trying to overturn the election results in Georgia are politically motivated. I mean, maybe you could say they're politically motivated, but in my opinion, at least, that's completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter. All that matters is the actual facts of the case, right? Did he commit the crimes that they are alleging that he committed? That's going to be, put in front of a jury, and they're going to decide whether or not he's guilty of those crimes. That's the only thing that matters. Now, you'll notice that when Republicans talk about these charges against Trump, they only view it through this kind of a lens, right? They view it through, this is an attack, this is election interference, this is the Biden, Department of Justice that is going against his political opponent and trying to sabotage him before the election because he's leading in the Republican Party by a mile. And it's like, well, they never actually get into the details of the case, right? They'll say things like, well, this is about, Trump's free speech, even though on page 2 of the, DC, fake slate of electors indictment led by Jack Smith, they literally outline that it has nothing to do with his free speech claims. He could have done all of that. It's about, the forgery. It is about the fake slates of electors. It is about trying to do an insurrection, right? I mean, so many different examples that we could point to of them not even entertaining the facts of the case, right? And that obviously applies to not only the political realm, but it also applies to, conservative media as well. And so you get, an insight in terms of why so many people believe these charges are simply politically motivated and that they don't have any factual basis, even though obviously, again, that is not true. But we continue here because this was another story that stood out to me. Because apparently religious leaders across the United States now, according to the New Republic here, they say some evangelicals are calling Jesus liberal and weak. Some evangelicals are calling Jesus liberal and weak. A former evangelical leader is sounding the alarm about the direction that his religion is headed in. So basically the story is about some different pastors across the country. And again, we just saw the polling data of people in the Republican Party who are supporting Donald Trump. They trust him more than their religious leaders. And then we also have reports like this of, some of these religious leaders pointing out that they'll go out and read a direct quote from Jesus, right? Who I think accurately some people say was was like, a socialist before socialism as a concept was even thought of, right? And, somebody who fought aggressively for the poor, somebody who said it would be more difficult for a rich man to get into heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of the needle, right? And so many different other instances, feeding the poor and hanging out with the downtrodden within society and people who had been rejected, right? A Middle Eastern refugee, if you will. And so they'll give direct quotes from Jesus himself, in their sermons or whatever the case may be. And then people are coming up to them after the mass, and they're saying that Jesus is liberal and weak now. Jesus has gone woke. I mean, it's just, again, I don't know how else you could possibly, in a good faith way, interpret polling data like this and say that at least that proportion of Trump supporters who trust him more than their friends and their families, right? Which is, by the way, just, another hallmark of an actual cult is usually these cults will try to separate you from your friends and your family and keep you isolated, because then you're more easily able to be manipulated, right? So, trust Donald Trump, one of the least trustworthy human beings throughout world history, and they trust him more than their friends, they trust him more than their family, they trust him more than even their religious leaders, who I don't even think they necessarily should trust, right? Obviously, I mean, I'm an atheist. I don't actually trust these religions either, even though I grew up as a Catholic. But, besides the point, I mean, these are all hallmarks of an actual cult, and I don't know how you could possibly interpret this in any other way. So, I'm typically, in my personal life at least, if there's somebody who is a conservative in my life or a Trump supporter in my life, I will try to have a conversation with them and to, convince them of what Trump actually stands for and contrast that with what he ran on in 2016 and what he, what did in 2020 and what he actually believes in and what his, ideological framework is, or at least his policy framework, given that he doesn't seem to have a coherent ideological framework. But I'll have these conversations with people, and it seems like there are always going to be some people who can be won over, some people who can be reasoned with, but then there's also a huge subset of the population that might not be reachable. I mean, that might just be the reality at the end of the day. And so it is, to some extent pretty alarming. I mean, we just talked about yesterday some of the stories of Trump supporters who are now threatening some of the jurors in these cases against him, who are threatening the judges, who are, Donald Trump even himself now threatening the witnesses and stuff. And, there was another story that I might cover later today or tomorrow of, a store shop that had a pride flag that was hanging out front of it. And the store owner ended up getting shot and killed by some homophobic freak on the right. And this is escalating to a point where it is getting legitimately dangerous. And when you have people who are following along with somebody like Donald Trump, who is being backed into a corner right now with all of these cases against him, with potential jail time in front of him, and then you have this escalation where he's not backing down and he's going to continue to try to escalate this to the point where his supporters will go out and legitimately fight for him, then again, we're heading towards a very scary and dangerous place. So I mean, there you have it. Again, just a little bit of a polling insight in terms of why it seems like the debate tomorrow is going to be somewhat pointless, given that these are basically the people who are running to either be his vice president or work in his cabinet or maybe get second place and get that silver medal at the end of the day, I guess. But I'll keep you guys updated as we get some of those clips that are coming out tomorrow. It's definitely going to be interesting. But I mean, polling data like this is just a reminder that the current state of the United States of America is not doing too well.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying